In terms of prominent thought leaders within the technology space in the UK, they don't come much bigger than this. Joe Baguley is the CTO of VMware for EMEA, but he's also an avid motorsport enthusiast, ex-TA member, and also a self-confessed technology geek. We discuss everything from being involved in the dot-com boom era and the technology innovation around that period, right through to the importance of empathy for leaders, the future of EVs and fossil fuel-powered cars and how that looks over the coming years. He also talks about his gift for explaining complexity in simplistic terms. We also talk about him having to go through 23 interviews to get the job at VMware, which was quite funny, and much, much more. Joe is a very polished operator and speaker, having done lots of interviews before, but he really opened up here and gave us some incredible insight. I think you will take a lot of value and will really enjoy this. It's Joe Baguley. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
No worries. It's fun to be here today.
So much to talk about, so much to unpack. I know you've had an incredible career. Let me just ask you, what does good leadership mean to you?
That's a really good question. I've been obviously on the receiving end of leadership and been a leader myself on and off through my career for nearly 30 years. The one thing that I think that I've had to educate people on the most in just behaving in corporate life and then becoming a leader is one word, which is empathy. You know, we can talk about lots of other different things, but the greatest leaders that I've seen have an ability to be empathetic. And that covers multiple different angles, right? It's not just about, being empathetic to the people that work for you. It's a whole bunch of things. If I look at most of the conflicts that happen in organizations, it's because people don't understand what's driving other people, and so then they can't, it's always talk about, can you put yourself in someone else's shoes kind of thing. So I think that's really important. So as you've got a core ability to at least sometimes see the other person's opinion, sit there and listen to how other people would feel, think about how other people would feel, and think about how the actions that you're making would make others feel, then it really, really helps in everything that you do in life, leadership or otherwise. So that would probably be my number one thing after all this time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think empathy is right up the top of my list too. So let's go back to rewind the clock a little bit then, Joe, for the guests who don't know anything about you. It'd be great to sort of, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of your background and how you got to the position you are right now as the CTO of VMware.
Yeah, short story. It's another podcast as well, but I'll tell the short one. School was in the 80s. Computer science was, very, very early stuff. I remember when I was at middle school, when probably age of 10 or 11, I suppose, really, was when we got our first BBC Micro. And I was the nerd at the back that got to play with the computer whilst everyone else went, oh, there's the nerd. I then went on to my secondary school or grammar school, and they actually did offer computer science at A-level, which was quite rare then in the 80s. And so I did computer science at A-level along with physics and maths and electronics. And it's obviously my passion around that area and has been my whole life, just geekery and gadgetry and all that other kind of stuff. I suppose it's kind of built into me because my father worked at IBM for 34 years as his career. So as I grew up, he was a mainframe systems engineer when he started. So I was surrounded by toolboxes and valves and bits and pieces. And he was always the person who would fix things and take things apart, whether it was a car or a radio or whatever. So I kind of grew up with that in my blood, I think. I went on to Imperial College to study computer science, so the best place in the world pretty much to study computer science at the time. And then became disenchanted after 2 years of being there that it really wasn't, academia wasn't for me. I wanted to get on and do stuff. So I went on and did other things. So one side of things, I'd also had a military side of my life as well. I'd been involved since Army cadets and then reserves and OTC and other different bits and pieces. So I went on to serve in the reserves for a long time. So, that's an interesting leadership aspect, I suppose, as an officer. But at the same time, I wanted to go out and get a real job, so to speak. And so I went and got a real job. It was actually quite an interesting one because I started out back in the early 90s, I could get a job anywhere because I could type. Not many people could type, right? So the ability, I literally went into it's a fun story. I went into a local agency in Marlow where I grew up. And instead I can type, and they went, okay, we'll get you a job as a secretary, because they were allowed to be called secretaries back then. I ended up first of all, it's actually very quickly. First of all, I was the lab assistant at a local college, And I spoke to the woman. I'll never forget her, and I wish I could find her again and thank her, because I said, "Oh, I'd love to work here full time." And she said, "No, you don't need to work here full time. You're wasted here. Go do something else." She was great. She almost turned me down and said, "You're not meant to be a lab assistant in a computer science lab." So I ended up as the assistant, bilingual, because I spoke French and English when I did at A level at university as a side thing, to the head of finance and remarketing for Hewlett Packard for Europe. Cut a very long story short there, I started out as the secretary to him, and 2 years later I was a manager on the help desk internally, and sort of went on from there through various consultancies and bits and pieces and weird stories of climbing under desks and flying to install Windows 95 on oil rigs and all this other wonderful stuff. And then the 20th century finished with me, changing my life, getting married, having children, and I changed my career. And so the 21st century, the first 10 years of it, I was at Quest Software, where I ended up as the CTO for Europe there. And then for the last 11 years, I've been here at VMware, where I joined ostensibly as the chief technologist for EMEA, and I continued in that role ever since. I'm now, as I say, the vice president and chief technology officer for VMware. It's been fun.
Well, I've heard you talk about your background in a bit more detail before, Joe, and it sounds to me that there is a sort of a litany of being in the right place at the right time. In some cases, some things very meritocratic. You by merit, you've got to the next point. Thinking back now, what were the sort of key milestones that stand out for you, do you think?
The key milestone first was at Hewlett Packard in sort of 96. I got to a point I realized I couldn't do that for the rest of my life. I couldn't sit behind the same desk for the rest of my life. I mean, great that it was, had a great team, great fun. And I still talk to 2 or 3 of them to this day. We're really good friends, that cut our teeth in data centers back in Amen Corner. But I wanted to go and do something more. I realized there was something more than working for one company or getting involved with one system, so to speak. I knew the system that I was managing and the stuff I was doing backwards to the point where it wasn't challenging me anymore, if you know what I mean. It was like, we're installing new bits, but it was like, I want new, I want exciting, I want different. And we were cutting edge at HP. We were installing NT for the first time and other things. So it was kind of, I wanted to go more. So I decided to go into, those times you wanted to be a consultant. That was the cool thing to be. So I found a way and I went and became a consultant. And I think that was interesting because it really was, every day was different. You're on a different site doing something different. You were meeting different people, integrated with different teams, and no 2 days were really the same. For me, I think it's knowing that it's not never ending, knowing that there's something new coming. So that was the first change really, was changing how I work from being in one place all the time to in terms of physically. So I think that introducing an element of being peripatetic, I think, is probably the best way to put it. Then I suppose the next big thing was I still wanted to be the expert in the thing. So whatever the thing was, I wanted to be the expert. I wanted to know everything about it. I wanted to literally be, if you want to know about that, then ask Joe, because he'll know exactly how it works, kind of thing, inside out, which is kind of what my father was as well, I suppose. And the other dawning point was actually much later on when I was at Quest Software. When I joined Quest, I was still installing software, configuring it, all that kind of stuff, and spent my days hands dirty, being the expert, wanted to know everything. And then I realized there were 2 things that I enjoyed. One was public speaking, which I'd never really done in that context. Obviously, I stood up in front of people in the army and presented a lot, and led people to do interesting things, but not in the, stand in a room and talk to them about computers. And then the other was letting go of the detail of the technology and getting broader. And I think that's the big thing for me. So that's kind of, how did I change? And when I now mentor people internally at VMware and externally when they sort of talk, how do I move on in my career? It's that choice. Do you want to be broader? Do you want to be bigger? Do you want to understand the context of things and see a bigger picture? I think that's really where I step forward. So there's those stages really as I go through of, getting out of being behind the desk, getting out and doing lots of meeting up with different people. And that sort of broadened my working horizon, but then broadening my technical horizon was kind of the second piece, I suppose. And that's really where it all adds up. It's weird to look back at it in that way because none of it was planned. This is the fun thing.
Yeah, sure. It never is though, Joe, is it?
No.
Serendipity it's a bit of a gift, isn't it? So I want to talk about that time, sort of from the mid-90s up until the early sort of 2000s, the noughties, that period when technology and the internet really sort of exploded. You must have loved being involved in that period of innovation and groundbreaking change in the sort of business IT landscape, certainly.
Oh, it was epic, I think, is the best way to describe it. There was just something new and absolutely groundbreaking happening all the time. If I think back when in the 90s, when I was out there working for SHL System Houses, was the company at the time, which became an MCI WorldCom company. It was very interesting. But I was essentially just a consultant out there doing stuff on site, installing things, et cetera, et cetera. I remember carrying around a huge folder full of CDs and floppy disks, right? And every month you get the latest version of TechNet from Microsoft, which had all the builds of it. You had a CD with Windows on it and all that kind of stuff. And that was it was your life, right? Suddenly there was this point where people were saying, okay, well, actually, you can download the latest drivers on the internet. And we're like, wow, that's game changing that I can access software on demand on the internet. Back in the 90s, was huge for me. So, but then it was all about modems, and plugging modems in and stuff like that. And it was that was great fun.
I'll never forget that noise, Joe. We're waiting for it to,
that noise. And the noise of a Spectrum computer game loading is something I'll never forget. So so that time was really exciting because you felt you were on the cusp of something. Things were being connected. Networking was still very basic. It was very awkward. It was a mess of things, and it was just stuff was starting to come together. And I remember one of my favorite ones was my friends and I got a small hub, a 5-port hub when Ethernet was 10 megabit, which was, unbelievably fast. It was amazing. And we had, laptops didn't come with network cards. And I remember doing a flight to Tech Ed in America, and there were 4 of us sat at the back of the plane, all with our laptops out. We'd all brought 5 batteries each that we'd stolen from stores. And we sat there and played online gaming. I think it was Doom or something similar for like hours on end, with network cables stretched across the back of the plane between the seats we were in, because we weren't in adjacent seats. So it was like, you were like, okay, I'm in this seat. And then 2 rows in front to the right, there's another guy. And we cabled up the back of the plane with people walking around. It was odd, but those kind of things. You felt like you were doing something really cool. This is the days of LAN parties and things. So I've done some odd stuff like that. And I think every techie's got those kind of stories where you've got some new thing. And that theme has sort of gone on to today. I mean, right down to today. And the stuff I'm doing with my car racing team with my mates, the fun bit is playing about with the radios and the wiring of the radios and stuff. And that still gets me excited. I've got, so I sit here, a large collection of radios that I've bought that I'm playing with and stuff. It's just that next new thing to get involved in. It's just gadgets, to be honest, Gareth, it's just gadgets, I suppose. So for me, that 90s bit was just, what's the next gadget I can play with? What's the next cool thing I can do?
What kind of gadgets are you into these days then? I understand you're an electric car enthusiast. I know you're into biking as well, but electric bikes perhaps? What kind of stuff do you play around with in your spare time now?
Electric bikes perhaps, that's an understatement. So there's a couple of things. So let's do the mountain biking bit first. I did mountain biking for a while in sort of 20, 30 years ago when mountain biking first started, but then about 2016, I think it was, 2016, my local bike shop, who I know quite well, just through friends, etc., said, we've got these electric mountain bikes in. I'm like, what on earth is an electric bike? And they said, just come down and try one. And I got one. I rode it around the park for like 200 yards. I went, all right, I've got to have one, right? And so I bought one off them. And then I went out with my mates who were on their non-electric mountain bikes, or acoustic bikes, as we call them now, as you have acoustic guitars, we have acoustic bikes. So we have they're acoustic bikes. And I could go much further. I could have much more fun. Still it's fit, but it was great fun, and you could do more stuff. And now all my mates are converted, and we're now deep into the gadgetry world of electric mountain bikes. And of course, from the bike firm's perspective, it's great because I upgrade my bike every 2 years as they bring out new gadgets and new features. And my latest bike has, I was trying to count, it's a lot of batteries on it, because you've just got the main battery, but then I've got wireless remote gears. So that's, I've got wireless remote. So I've got a wireless remote dropper post. I've got wireless remote connected to my phone live suspension. I've got 2 different sets on that.
Wow.
I've got the suspension itself, and I've got suspension tuning, which is a thing called ShockWiz. And then even my bike unnecessarily comes with live tire pressure sensors, which is overkill in my mind. I don't need tire pressure sensors on my mountain bike. So, the fact
I didn't think overkill was something that featured in your vocabulary, Joe, when it comes to motorsport and stuff
I do sit there sometimes when I'm sat in my garage prepping my bike to go on a bike ride, and I realize I've got to sit there for 20 minutes to make sure I've done the firmware updates on my bike before I cycle out. I'm kind of thinking maybe this has gone a bit too far, but then you get out there and some of the tech cuts in. And so on the flip side, on motorsport, in the 90s, one of the things I did, so at university, one of the things I did really enjoy was motorsport, and I did karting and rallying, and I was part of the motor club. Off the back of that, I ended up involved in special stage rallying in the 90s as one of my hobbies alongside being in the TA. I got my full international rally license and did all these fun, wonderful things. And that kind of paused. And then just various track day things on and off for years with mates. And then Tesla arrived, and that's a whole different ball game. And I was in So a good friend of mine is Adrian Cockcroft, and Adrian Cockcroft's quite famous in our industry. He was the sort of guy behind Netflix, invented microservices and all that kind of stuff. And I was out in 2014 in California, and he had one of the Tesla Roadsters, and he took me out to Laguna Seca on one weekend with him and his wife Laurel, and I sat behind the wheel of this car and on track. It was actually in an auto test bit in the car park. The video is actually online on YouTube. And within 3 seconds of putting my foot down in that car, I was the same thing. It's like the electric bike. I was like, I've got to have one of these.
Yeah.
This is amazing. You know,
yeah, I was the same. I've got a Tesla coming in February. It's not one of those really fast
fast forward to that, I had one of the first Model X's in the country. Was in line for the Model 3. I had one of the first of the Model 3 performances. And whilst I was waiting for the Model 3 performance, friend of a friend sort of got in touch and said, I'm going to start building tuning parts for Model 3s. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And so fast forward to yesterday, and yesterday morning, I took some time out and went to a track where we are now testing a fully active damping system for suspension upgrades for the Tesla. And my Tesla, we've got upgraded brakes, and there's a whole bunch of us now tuning them. And I competed in sprints. I was in Autocar magazine. We had an article on us in August this year. If you go back and look at the August the 10th issue, for those people listening, about us competing in sprints. So yeah, for me, and I'm now, one of the other mails I've received this morning is from MS UK, where I'm working with MS UK, and I'm talking to people like Jonathan Palmer, who spotted us on circuit at Brands Hatch and came down and had a chat and said, what's going on? These Teslas, they look cool, and drove my car on the track with me in the passenger seat, which was an experience, I can tell you. And so, yeah, there's a thing starting around electric cars in tracks. It's very, very nascent. It's very early days. I'm part of a group of people educating a 100-year plus history of petrol people into how electric cars can come in and have fun. And the interesting thing about that is that's an empathy thing, right? You want to come back to empathy. It's going in there saying, I'm not coming in here saying that electric cars are better than petrol cars. I'm not coming in here saying that electric cars will replace petrol cars. What I'm coming in here to say is, these are fun, and we'd like to come and have some fun, please, like you're having fun in the petrol cars. And I don't want, I don't want comparisons between them, but this is a motor in a car, and we'd like to have some fun with it. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Well, that sounds incredible, and I'm certainly going to look that up. But let's use this as a segue onto Mission Motorsport. You combined your passion with obviously something else that you're very passionate about, obviously as an ex-forces guy. Mm-hmm. So what is the purpose of the organization, and what exactly do you do?
So Mission Motorsport has been running for 10 years now. I got involved with them about 5 or 6 years ago, actually, believe it or not, through the electric cars, obviously, and I was one of the people that brought electric cars along. Mission Motorsport is a charity that is essentially about the motto is race, retrain, recover. What it's about is using motorsport as a therapy tool, motorsport and cars generally, the motor industry, as a route to a continuation after the military. So we look at how we use motorsport for therapy for those people with PTSD and other such things. And it's some fascinating stories in there about getting people back out, getting them doing something, seeing a next step in their lives and seeing that, there can be different things to do. At the same time as getting literally thousands of service leavers into jobs at companies like Jaguar Land Rover and Lotus and others. So it's a phenomenal charity. And I was finally given the honor that actually just last month I was formally made a board member and trustee of the charity. So, that's a big step forward for me as well. So, yeah, it's a great place. And we run these days where we turn up, people turn up like myself. I turn up with the Tesla. Other people turn up with phenomenal cars. We're talking Aston Martins, McLaren F1s, amazing bits of kit. Yeah. And then beneficiaries. So these are, beneficiaries of the charity will come along, and the stories you get, just, someone who's been sat around on a sofa feeling like, there's not much else for them in their life and getting very depressed either through medical problems or other things or whatever, just to have that day when they realize they can feel alive again and they can actually start to, enjoy things and do things and see that there's a future, and then meet other people like them and get those connections and drag themselves back into, connecting with society, et cetera, is huge. And so that's just the transformations I've seen, just sat next to, as initially just someone who came and helped drive on the track days to now hopefully helping lead them forward and drive them forward to the next 10 years of amazing success of changing people's lives. It is huge for me, and I think that's massive. And I lead the veterans pod. So we have a veterans group within VMware, and I lead the veterans pod within EMEA as well as the sort of sponsor and VP for that. And there we've got active reserve people globally, and obviously a lot of veterans that work for us at VMware as well. So it's working to support people either if they're actively serving. We've got family members of serving members, signing up the covenant in the UK, for example, and all those different bits and pieces, making sure that we're as integrated and supporting for veterans and their families as much as possible in what we do at VMware. So it all kind of comes together quite nicely, I think, in that context. But yeah, so Mission Motorsport, rightly, it's a way that I can go out and share my passion for driving with doing that. And it all comes together. I have to tell you, it's the most exciting thing is the Race of Remembrance, which is just military bonkers in November. So in November in Anglesey, so you can't think of anywhere where there'll be better weather in the world at that time than November in Anglesey, right? We come together with 50 cars to do a 12-hour endurance race in Anglesey. It involves 9
Take an umbrella.
It involves a thing called the Biathlon of Foolishness, where people run around the track in fancy dress, then go swimming in the sea in November in Anglesey. We stop the race on the Sunday morning for a remembrance parade, and then start the race again. And myself and 3 friends who've never raced a car before but have done track days with me for years are entering for the first time. And so that's what we're doing. You'll find us out there on Facebook as Matabubu Racing. It's a comedy of think Top Gear type adventure, but done even more badly. That's basically what we're doing. It's going to be hilarious. Yeah.
We will put that on the show notes and also Mission Motorsport website as well.
Great, please. That'd be fantastic.
People can get involved. That sounds like an incredible cause. I'm really keen to ask you, actually, Joe, you know a lot about this space. I mean, you hear people sort of forecasting that we'll all be driving EVs within 10 years, 5 years. What is your take on that?
We've got deadlines coming, okay? So 2030 in the UK will be when you'll be able to start. You won't be able to sell a car that's just pure petrol or diesel. So hybrids will still be sold, but they have to be plug-in. And then from 2035, you will only be able to sell plug-in electric cars onwards. You won't be able to buy a petrol or diesel car, all right? So that's a deadline that's coming anyway. I think you have to look at it slightly more philosophically, though, which is how the best comparison I've got is that if you think about right now, we have people that drive around in petrol or diesel cars all day, and that's what they do. And that's the boring thing they use to get to work and back and all this other kind of stuff. And then on the weekend, they go and play with these smelly, dirty things that they ride around on called horses, okay? Which are the playthings of various people that have an interest in horses, not just rich people. Whoever wants to go and play with a horse is what they go and do, right? But they're anachronistic, they're interesting, and they're not our main means of transport. So, very simply, you can see where I'm going with this. Just flick that, right? Petrol cars and diesel cars are not going to go away, right? I'm not going to suddenly not like the sound of a Aston Martin V12 at full chat. That's not going to be taken out of me because that's been built into me as a child. New generations will look at those noisy cars and go, why, what, how, what, that's why, But my generation is kind of, you associate this sort of noise with speed and passion and excitement.
Yeah, sure.
What's built into you, right? I imagine if aliens landed tomorrow, they'd look at it and go, why are you making all that noise and wasting all that energy? And, it doesn't make sense. Those electric cars over there are much quicker. So yeah, fast forward, we'll be using electric cars to get around in and do everything to get from A to B, and it'll just be normal and boring. And, and then the weekends, people will go out and play with their petrol cars, maybe with an alternative fuel, right? So maybe we'll be using, and there are, some great research being done now by some XF1 guys and others on using literally CO2 from the air along with other bits and pieces and creating carbon fuels and stuff. So there's a potential that there'll still be fuel available for them. It might not be a fossil fuel. So those things will exist. We'll have great fun with them. But when you look at an end-to-end efficiency, you can't beat a battery electric car right now. Even hydrogen doesn't even come close. So it's going to happen.
Sure. So then maybe you're a bit longer yet then. So let's go back to yourself then. I want to talk about VMware, Joe, okay? Now, legend has it that you had 23 interviews to get the job at VMware. Can you talk us through that? Is that true?
Yeah.
Can you talk us through that period in your life when the opportunity came up and why you joined VMware?
Yeah. So I was at Quest Software, doing very well. Great place to be, having great fun. But again, I'd been there 10 years and I was kind of like, okay, maybe there's something next. And, when you've been somewhere for 10 years, you get very comfortable, right? So moving somewhere else, you know the politics, all the ins and outs, how to make it work. Life's really easy when you've been somewhere 10 years, right? Yeah. So, to pick yourself up like that and move somewhere else is quite brave. But I was contacted by a friend of mine who worked at VMware, and indirectly via Paul Moritz, who was the CEO, to say, we'd like you to come and have a chat with us about being CTO for EMEA. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. What does it involve? But basically what it is I'd created this role at Quest Software for CTO EMEA, which was doing what I do, which is sort of evangelism and product management, all these different bits and pieces, well, essentially being an extension of a US organization and operation over here in press and analysts and all those things. And they sort of said, okay, we'd really like you to do that for us, because our CTO, then Steve Herod, Dr. Steve Herod, just can't be here enough. So when we need someone like him over here, we want you to pop up and say, oh, I'm here instead of Steve, and I can tell you everything you ever want to know. That's really it. And so, of course, back at the time, VMware, and still is an engineering-led company. It's very technical. It's all about your technical props. It's all about, how much of a geek are you? How much technologist are you? So I was flown over to California, and in 2.5 days, as it rightly says, I had 23 interviews. Wow. I'd had some interviews in the UK first, so I've met about 5 or 6 people here, various members of the European leadership, just I think mainly to check that I, looked okay and didn't smell or whatever it was, and that I was okay, and they could work with me. But I knew a few of them by reputation anyway. And then I was sent over, and I had 20, and I was interviewed by, some of the deepest, most technical, geeky people would drill me, and it was very, very interesting, because I had to essentially go in there and back then establish myself as someone who could walk into a room and incredibly be respected by them, to hold a conversation, have an opinion that they'd appreciate, that I'd fitted into their culture, because culture is really important at VMware. So I think we're a bit better at it now. We're a much larger company. We're about 6,000 people then. We're 40,000 now, so we've got more processes in place. But yeah, it was a very interesting process in 2.5 days. I was jet lagged as well. It was just like, horrible. Imagine, yeah. But I got there, and it was great. And I think what inspired me most about joining VMware was that I realized I was never going to be the smartest person in any room at VMware. It was just never going to happen. And there were some amazing people I got to work with. As I sat around, there was the guy that wrote the kernel for Windows NT. There's the guy that architected eBay, the guy that, it was just like, the list went on, the guy that wrote the files, it's just, the list went on and on of luminaries within our industry that were assembling at VMware at that time to sort of build what we called this operating system for data centers, which became known as the software-defined data center, which really built the foundation for public cloud and private cloud that we see today. Sure. There was a buzz, right? For me, it was back to the gadgets. It was like, this is really cool. Something amazing is going to happen here, and I believe in this. And so that was really it.
Yeah, well, it's one of the star organizations, even in Silicon Valley, isn't it? I mean, it's been a very impactful company over the last 20 years, really. So how would you describe the culture there then? I mean, was it a bit of a culture shock going to a company like that from Quest Software? Or
No, so Quest was, so I've always worked for West Coast software companies, right? So that's a different thing. So you've got your East Coast and your West Coast software companies. Your East Coast companies are your IBMs, etc., right? And your West Coast companies were HP and Quest Software and Cisco and all those kind of things. There's a very different culture. So I was already a West Coast software guy, I suppose, really. Yes. At Quest, I was down in Aliso Viejo and Orange County and stuff like that. So I kind of it was not a big leap of faith to jump up to the Bay Area, really. I think that the important thing about VMware is that it is possibly, when I was at HP in the early 90s, it was a family company. The 2 founders were still there. We had a book you were handed called The HP Way. I was trained as a manager in what's called MBWA, which was management by walking around. It was, get up now and again and just walk around your people, see them, be part of it, involve yourself. But it was a family thing. It was all about family fun days, and there were a lot of couples that worked there. There were, it was a very,
that was HP. Probably instilled some good leadership values in you, I suppose.
Oh, hugely. Yeah, hugely so. And it really, really helped me as well. And there's friends I know still working there, actually, that I can still, that have been there all that time. And then, come to VMware. VMware was the first place, again, where I found that same culture. VMware, to describe it to me, I've got a friend actually texted me this morning who's interviewing to join VMware, and he's sort of saying, what's the culture like? And, you kind of want to say, it's really quite nice. It's a horrible thing to say. It's the worst word ever, right?
Yeah.
It's just, but people are supportive. We celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that no one else goes. And this is what I mean, and I know that sounds a bit cliched, but I've actually been asked to be on the boards of other companies, not for my tech props, but because of having worked at VMware and our reputation for a diverse and inclusive workplace that, just gets stuff done. And it really is, I don't know, it's a fabulous place to be. And the best way to describe it was, we had a campaign a few years ago now called Dare. And Dare at VMware said, dare to bring your whole self to work. Don't put on a special face to come in the office. Don't put on your work face. Come into the office the same as you come into the office. You walk into your house and talk to your family. Because if you're not putting up that facade, that's a lot of effort to put on all the time. You can actually get your job done, and we'll accept you as you are, right? That transformed us as a company. And one of my favorite bits about that is one of my colleagues came out as transsexual in the office before they came out amongst their family and friends. So they would turn up to the office as a woman and then go back home and change and sort of hide it from their private life. Now, what does that tell you about a culture, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, was groundbreaking. And I've learned so much that I didn't know before when I joined VMware. Up until then, it wasn't really something that ever dawned on me. I've got daughters, but no one ever spoke to me about DEI. It wasn't a thing. And it's become so much part of what we do that it's just a fabulous place to work. So I come here and I'm myself. And that's what I really like about VMware. I don't have to put on a face. And it's really cool. I had lunch on Monday with a graduate that joined us a few years ago and stayed with us for a while. And she moved off, gone to work for another company. And she sort of said the one thing she misses is the culture at VMware. She said the openness isn't there at the company she's at. She said there's no way she could just sit down and have a chat with a VP like me. It just doesn't, didn't exist. And those barriers don't exist at VMware. We're a bunch of people trying to get stuff done. And it's great.
I've heard you saying before that part of your success is down to your ability to be able to communicate things in layman's terms. So what is the art of good communication about complex things in the tech world, communicating them in an effective way?
So again, it comes back to that first word I started with, empathy. The first question I ask when someone asks me, as I do daily, present to so-and-so, I want to know about them. I want to know what drives them. I want to know what's in their heads. Where are they coming from? What's their level of understanding? Because I want to communicate to them at their level in ways that mean and add value to them. Right? It's that simple, really. It's taught in sales schools as pain-based selling or this other kind of wonderful stuff. But basically, it's understanding your audience. I think that's the fundamental piece. Standing up and just giving the pitch you've been taught, because that's the pitch you've been taught, doesn't land properly. Sure. Understanding your audience, understanding what they want to come out of that room feeling afterwards, and then working out how you impart that to them is the fundamental, I think, to good comms, to good presenting, to good anything. And so, my question when anyone asks me to do a presentation is, what's the one thing you want those people to leave that room thinking? And they go, well, I'd like these 7 things on it. No, I'll give you 1, then we'll get to 3. And then and that's basically it, right? So anything after that is going to be superfluous and highlights. But basically, yes. So that's really that's the fundamental of it. That's where I'll start, and then I'll build out from there. And it's then about storytelling, and that's the other important thing. I think people don't get in communicating, and I learned very early on it's about storytelling. And I think I've said before, the most effective communicators I've ever seen are stand-up comics. You will sit and watch stand-up comics for hours. They don't have PowerPoint. Dave Gorman does, right? But I think in reality, someone who can stand up for an hour or 2 and hold your attention, that stuck with me fairly early on. I went, okay, fine. Those are good presenters. Okay, how do I become that? So I went and did a stand-up comedy course, which was quite fun.
Really?
And a residential, did a 3-day residential stand-up comedy course, which finished with us going and actually doing a 5-minute set at a local comedy club cold. It was quite weird.
Wow.
But what that did was that taught me about, understanding and reading an audience, but it taught me about constructing a story. It taught me about callbacks. If you want to see a really good example of that, Stuart Lee is just an absolute master of this. So callbacks are really important. Callbacks are when you're doing a presentation and then you make a callback to something you said earlier, which kind of references and starts linking things together.
Sure.
So it's almost like you set it up. Whereas most people do a presentation and here's the next slide and here's the next slide and here's the it's like and it's those clever sort of winky eye callbacks to what you did before, the audience start to connect with and it starts to join up in their heads. That's what really helps. And so to learn good comms and good presentations, I watch stand-up comedians. I watch people like Stuart Lee. I watch others, and I work at what I can do. And then from there on, once you understand where someone's coming from and the level of understanding, translating something technical into their level of understanding shouldn't be that hard. Most of the time I'm trying to work out how to explain it to my mother. It's a good way to do it. But that's pretty much it, really. But it's talking on their level. I mean, we present at the VMware user group annually. I always do it, and at various places around the world. And there I always remember that I'm talking to people that are in the seat that I was in the 90s. They're out there, they're in the trenches, they're building systems, they're trying to keep things up, they're running all that kind of stuff every day. So in that talk, I'm very much aimed at them and what they'd want to get. What they're doing in that room is they're saying to themselves, okay, I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn some cool tech stuff. I'm also here to learn what I should be doing with my career and what I need to learn about to be around still and valid in my job in 5 years' time. That's what you're imparting there. That's a different to when I'm presenting to a CFO or I'm presenting to a CEO or a CIO or whatever. So that's the point. It's that ability to learn what your audience wants.
Yeah, sure. I'm very impressed you went on a stand-up comedian course. Any aspirations to do a tour or anything, Joe? Or
No,
ever do it again?
not at all. One of my I was in the sixth form with Jimmy Carr. Jimmy Carr was in the same year as me at school. He was not a stand-up comedian or anything like that when he was at school. He was the quiet guy that did classics in the corner, and he sort of came into it later in life. I think a lot of people do. So no, I don't think I've got a want to be I'm not searching for that, to be honest. But it was just something that enabled me to understand comms better.
I want to talk about the pandemic. Obviously, it changed so many things for so many people. What did it change for you, Joe? And a little bit of a bolt onto that as well. What did it change for the culture at VMware?
We had always been connected. We'd, through our own products, I'm not going to sales pitch here, but through our own products, we were always, working remotely was fundamental to us. And, we have a highly distributed workforce. So a lot of our developers were working from home anyway. So that wasn't a big problem. From a technology perspective, it really wasn't an issue. It was just, okay, we just use more of the stuff that we're using already. We don't have to deploy new things or do new things or whatever. From a working practices perspective, I think people sat back and went, okay, fine, we have to work very, very differently, and sort of have over-rotated in some ways. And we're now sort of bouncing back very gently. I think people now realize that you still need to physically meet people now and again just to maintain that. And I think people felt that I went into the pandemic with a team that I was very connected with, the EMEA leadership team. Now, there's been some changes in that team over the last 2 years or so, and we've not all got together physically in that time. And there's a different dynamic now with the team I'm in now than there was 2 years ago, with a team where we'd hung out together, we'd, had dinner together. And I think the important thing there is what you miss is the chit chat, the mindless chat about nothing that gives you a connection with another human being. Whereas the Zoom's very much, you get on, right, okay, what are we here to do? Bang, 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 bang. Thanks, cheers, bye, next Zoom. You never get that human connection with people. So I think we need to find better ways to do that. And I think that's what we're now doing at VMware. So we are getting together where appropriate. And so we're now turning our office worlds more, and like everyone else's, into collaboration spaces. But I think we now have hybrid work as a default, and people can choose where they want to work. You can choose either to work fully at home, you can choose to work half and half, you can choose to work in the office, whatever suits you. And different cultures, different generations, different people want to work in different ways. So, some people don't want to work at home, and we found that out in the pandemic. You've got a 20-something graduate that's sat in a flat with, nothing to do and no friends and no one to hang out with and no social life. If I remember back, my social life when I was younger was at work. My wife I met at work, so we've got to remember that's there too. So for VMware, I think it endorsed what we were already doing in terms of remote work.
Yeah.
But I think like everyone else, we've learned lessons at the same time, and we're learning lessons every day.
Do you think there may be a bit of a societal backlash brewing as a result of working from home or anything else which has happened as a result of the pandemic? For example, people who are just entering the workforce now and they're working from home 3, 4, 5 days a week, and they don't have the benefit of, experienced people around them to learn from, like you did, clearly, at HP. You know what I mean? The serendipity
totally.
of the water cooler conversation, which
Totally.
can take you in a different path than the project you're working on.
Every single job move I did at HP was done in the smoking room, by the way.
There we go. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. Do you think we're going to feel negative repercussions in years to come, or have other things happened which are going to cushion that?
I think people are going to find their niches. I think actually it's not about that. I think I think it's just offering more choices for people to be diverse about how they work. So I think people will settle into the niches that they want to settle into. My daughter's left university early, like I have actually. She left after 2 years because again she didn't really want to do it and wasn't what she wanted to do. Yeah. And she's now working in events for an events company and spending all day out there with people doing stuff and not really in an office. So sure. I think the jobs are still going to be there to work not from home. The jobs are still going to be there to work from home. I think so. I don't think there's going to be a backlash. I think if anything, we've got a society that's becoming more understanding of different working practices. I think so. It's actually for the better. I think it's really cool. Brilliant.
That's a good answer. What technology innovation are you most excited about in the world right now, Joe?
Oh, yeah. So I suppose probably the one that's most exciting to me is what we're calling 6G, and the stuff I get most excited about. There's two areas.
That one. 5G only just came, didn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. How inventive are you, Joe? You've gone 5G and added one. Woo, what did you mean? Yeah, no, so I think very simply, and to in brief, what we're looking at the moment. If you look at the moment, we have telcos, so your Vodafones, etc., and then we have your cloud companies, your Amazons, and things like that.
Yeah.
through 3G, 4G, and 5G, the telco networks have become more and more like IT companies because they've had to be because of how you build and deploy those networks and how they're operated. So they're less physical, they're more virtual, digital, et cetera, et cetera. 6G is where we're going to see, ultimately, there will be no difference between a telco and a cloud company. So the battles are going to be coming up between the Vodafones and Amazon and Microsoft and T-Systems and all these kind of things. And so it's really interesting to see that happen. Okay. And then ally that with the tech that's being thrown around. And so a lot of what I'm doing at the moment, believe it or not, is involved in space stuff, things like Starlink and other bits where we're going to have low Earth orbit. You're just seeing it now, right? So the latest iPhone has the ability to do emergency calling to a satellite phone. That's just the start. If you look at what Starlink are now doing, Starlink are launching with T-Mobile in the States, the ability for all mobile phones that are 5G capable on T-Mobile to be able to talk to satellites through Starlink, not in a much more useful way rather than the sort of short text emergency stuff in the new iPhone 14s. So that ubiquity of connectivity is coming, I think. So if you want to, that's what's exciting to me, is that more and more people are going to be connected in more and more ways. I've got sat next to me a Starlink dish, which I use in various places to stay connected as I move around now. So, that's happening. You put that, together with the other area that's a passion in my life right now, which is around sustainability, and more importantly, the evolution around smart grids and solar panels and batteries. I've got a whole separate podcast I can do around that. But what we're doing in that space, and the companies that I'm involved in that are buying up old power stations and creating hydrogen generation plants that are going to be used from solar to cell to marine, and it's so much exciting stuff going on in that space. That's the next 10, 15 years of my life. Will be passionately invested in those kind of technologies without a doubt, because I think that's really exciting.
Brilliant. One thing that I'm really keen to get your thoughts on is, what career advice would you give to your 21-year-old self? Looking back now again in the armchair, what would you say to that guy, Joe?
I've thought about this before, actually. I've been asked it, and there's a few things I'd add, and it's very simple. So the first thing is there's no such thing as being grown up. Everyone, no matter how old, is being that age for the first time, and you're kind of working out how to deal with it and what to do next. I'm nearly 50. I've never been nearly 50 before. I'm trying to work out what happens now, My daughter's just got engaged. I've never done that before, so I'm discovering that for the first time. You never finish. No one turns up at some point and goes, "Well done, you're a grown-up now. You've completed everything. You've reached the boss level, and here's the end." It doesn't happen that way. I think the other thing that I would add is, don't try and fit yourself into other people's molds. Some of the mistakes I think I've made in my past is where I've tried to change myself to fit in with things that maybe I shouldn't have tried to fit in with. So that dare to be thing, I think, was probably the most releasing thing for me at VMware that we did, and I think that's it. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to take some time out. I think there's times in your life when you can't. So when you can, take that opportunity with both hands. And, there's times when I'm maxed out with things going on in my personal life and public life and things like that, and I'm just like, do you know what? I could just take a month out right now and it'd be brilliant. So if you do get a chance to do that, whether it's when you're 18 before you go to university, or when you graduate and you haven't got dependencies or kids or house or any of that kind of stuff, and you could just go and travel around the world for 3 years, go do it, right? You live for a very long time, right? So go and do that. And the other thing, I suppose, is don't think that what you're going to do when you're 18 or what you want to do when you're 18 is anything like what you want to do when you're 30 or 40. So be flexible in your outlook. Don't stick yourself in a path. So those are probably the ones that I'd highlight most.
Brilliant advice. Just a quick bolt-on question. How do you avoid burnout, Joe?
A couple of things. I block large sections in my diary out. That's one thing. I literally do. I realized that before, when I was traveling all the time, that time was when I had time to myself. Literally just sit there, think, just do nothing. No distractions, no one attracting me, just chill. When you jump into the Zoom world of bang, 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 call, bang, 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 et cetera, on demand all the time. So I freely admit I have sections in my diary just blanked out like 4 hours at a time, right? And it's either marked out as KF for keep free, or DRW, which stands for do real work. I
love that.
Otherwise, you never get stuff done. So I think that's it. And I think for me, the other thing is I've always been an adrenaline junkie. If you look back through all my hobbies, I've listed some of them here. Mountain biking, clay pigeon shooting, special stage rallying, driving around tracks, all that kind of stuff. Sure. It's because how I chill out, I realize, is by focusing entirely on something else. So my brain doesn't stop. And I've got some kind of condition in that way. I've never been diagnosed. My brain never switches off. But what I do is I go and point that very active brain at something completely different for a while. That means I don't think about other things. You don't think about all the other problems in your life. I'm so focused on not dying on this mountain, So yeah, so it's odd. I chill out by doing something really high adrenaline and involving.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, let's use this point to go on to my final question then, which is, I'm sure, when you go on vacation or something, if you're anything like me, I need to keep mentally active. And as such, I normally read a book or whatever. I'm not sure if you're much of a reader, but I normally ask the guests for a book recommendation. Any impactful books, and if not documentaries or other pieces of content, which have shaped the way you think or have impacted the way you look at life?
No, this is really funny. I don't read books. I was a kid. I was a kid who devoured nonfiction. I was surrounded by nonfiction. My life is full of nonfiction books. I'm not a big fan of self-help books or fiction books or anything else like that. So I can't really come up with a book recommendation because it's not my thing. It's not how I operate. I'm just a constant information sponge. I'm constantly watching something on YouTube or TikTok. Or TikTok's perfect for someone like myself, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll spend hours on Wikipedia, mining and follow that and click on that and click on that and click on that. So for me, the best book ever was the internet. Literally, I sit there. If I was a kid who could never get enough nonfiction books, to have like the whole internet now is just amazing.
Sure.
So I sit there and my wife thought. I remember when we first got together, she's like, "Will you get off the computer?" I'm like, "And do what? Read a book." Like I am. I'm like, I am reading the equivalent of a book. It just happens to be on this computer and it's presented differently. So what's the
and it's endless.
And it's endless and it never ends. And what's the problem? So yeah, I watch movies and films and stuff, but for the fiction stuff. But yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I've got no recommendations apart from go look on the internet. It's great.
Well, I think that you've inadvertently answered the question and given us probably the ultimate book recommendation in terms of going on the internet. So, but look, thank you so much for coming on, Joe. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. We could have easily burned through another hour. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Love that. Joe is such a polished operator. Clearly, he's done this before, and it was just so exciting to talk through some of the most pivotal points in his career. I think there's so much wisdom and so many segments that I can point to here. But I think the three key takeaways, and I did allude to these in the intro, but I think they're so important. I really want to point at these again. And the first one is empathy, the importance of knowing who you're leading and kind of jumping in their shoes and walking their path. I think that's so important, and I'm glad Joe emphasized that. The next one is the ability to communicate complexity and be simple in the way you communicate it so that everybody understands it. I think that's brilliant and something that isn't some sort of gift. It's something that Joe had to practice and got better at for reasons he described. The last one is aligning passion with hard work, because that's where the magic happens. And I think he clearly, left university early doors, didn't get his degree, and just went after what he wanted to do. And of course, there was good fortune and everything else was in play. But I think the fact he backed himself because he was doing what he loved, and that's culminated in him landing, albeit after 23 interviews, landing an incredible position at VMware as the CTO of EMEA. Great guy. Really would love to get the opportunity to do this again and elaborate on some of the stuff you mentioned. I hope you enjoy it. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for downloading this episode. We really love doing this show and are absolutely humbled by all of the incredible people who download and listen, plus the incredible guests who take the time to come on and share their secrets and experiences with our listeners. Please can I ask that you take a couple of seconds to subscribe or follow the show. This small action means a lot to us and helps us greatly. Thank you. As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate or innovate.
head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favorite social media platform.